and thought it was a miserable place to have the G7. It was way too small. It was way too remote. My understanding is the media didn't like it because you had to drive an hour in a bus to get.
We are.
I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
It's interesting, when we come here, we seem to think that everybody in America is reading the blogs and all the major newspapers every morning. A lot of people do, but some people have lives to live. They get up early, they go to work. They listen to the news from time to time, but they don't follow it closely. That's what they hire us to do, and that's what they hire us to deal with as policymakers. And on this issue of Syria, it strikes me, it really did earlier this week when I frequent a gas station close to my house that also has like a little convenience store with a coffee stand inside, and a gentleman comes up to me and basically starts saying, why do we care about all the stuff that's happening there? You know, it's thousands of miles away. These people have been fighting forever. Let them figure it out. Why do we have to be involved in all of this? And I will tell you that there's appeal to that argument. There really is. And I understand why Americans feel that way. We've had, since September of 2001, we've lost countless young men and women abroad in combat. We've seen families that have been ripped apart. We've seen the injuries that people come home from, not to mention the amount of money that's been spent in all this as well. At a time when we face so many challenges, a lot of people are saying to themselves, well, why do we have to be everywhere? Like, why do we have to care about what these people have been fighting for a billion years? It's not our problem. We need to focus on issues here at home. I do understand the appeal of that argument. And I want to tell you that despite how much I focus on these issues and spend time on them, from time to time, those arguments appeal to me. But then you have to analyze why we're there to begin with and what it would mean in the short to long term to our country to just walk away from these obligations. And that's what I hope to do here today in a way that answers that gentleman's question that he asked me last Monday. I didn't have time to get into all this because I had an airplane to catch, and these airlines don't wait for anybody. And so here's the way I would explain it. The first is you have to tell people why we're there to begin with. Let me tell you what this is not. This is not about endless war or being somewhere for the rest of our lives, or frankly, it's not even about committing thousands of troops. The U.S. force presence in Syria was quite small, actually achieved an extraordinary amount with such few number of people, 2,000 special operators embedded alongside thousands of Kurds and international partners. Basically, an area that ISIS once dominated. They literally controlled the cities. The capital of their caliphate was there at one point. They were driven out. Tremendous success, a real example of the sort of counter-terror missions that have been successfully pursued. The stated goal was first and foremost to stamp out and eliminate ISIS. The second was that our presence would provide leverage when the time came for a Syrian peace settlement, a settlement that would reflect our national interest, primarily three things. Number one, limiting Assad's power. The guy is a stone-cold, criminal. I mean, this guy has gassed and murdered his own people. There has to be some limits and constraints to his power. The second is to safeguard the Kurds. As you've heard others come to the floor and talk about, these people fought with us. We told them, if you will do the ground fighting and we help you from the air and with logistics, we're going to be here with you. And they did, and they lost over 10,000 people in that fight. They've been great partners in that endeavor. And we had a moral obligation, not to mention a promise that we made. And the third is to limit Iran's influence. Iran would love nothing more than to completely dominate Syria because it links them directly into Lebanon to supply and support Hezbollah. It allows them to pivot over into Iraq to become the dominant power there. And just imagine a Middle East in which Iran is the dominant power in Lebanon, in Syria, of course in Iran, eventually in Iraq, God forbid in Bahrain, growing influence in Yemen through the Houthis. They only encircle Israel, they encircle Saudi Arabia. It would be a nightmare. We are engaged in a campaign of maximum pressure against Iran, and the last thing you want to do in a maximum pressure campaign is alleviate pressure. And having greater influence in Syria would alleviate a lot of pressure for Iran. And so that is the purpose of our presence there. And I want to tell you, the administration and the president's decision has undermined every single one of them. And that's the only way to talk about it. And I think has done so in ways that we're going to regret for a long time. The first is the ISIS mission. 10,000 ISIS killers being held in jails and camps in northern Syria. The guards at those camps were not Americans, they were Kurdish guards. What happens when someone invades the cities that your family lives in? You send people to go meet that enemy. And that means they have been removing guards from the prisons to the front lines. There are less and less guards in these camps. Already estimates are of a number of ISIS killers have already gotten out and anticipate more to get out soon. But just imagine these 10,000 killers running loose, not to mention efforts by ISIS to break them out with less security. By the way, this is a problem not just in Syria, it's a real problem in Iraq. Already about 200,000 refugees are massed at the border. There's no way Iraq can go through every single one of them and determine who's an ISIS killer and who's a refugee who's coming back. And so you could suddenly see this resurgence of ISIS spread and destabilize Iraq. So suddenly this evil movement that we had on the ropes and had become an insurgency, and frankly was already re-emerging as an insurgency, has just been given fuel to operate in one, now in two countries. How about the goal of providing leverage for a future settlement to reflect our interests? Well, first of all, on restraints in Assad's power, think about it this way. Literally overnight, because the Kurds had to now, when the Turks came in, the Kurds didn't have us anymore, they were forced to cut a deal with Assad. And so suddenly, the Kurds are basically telling Assad's troops, come up to the cities that we once had, and you now be the troops here to back us up. You take control of them. That's what they had to do to avoid being slaughtered. So what it means in practical terms is that Assad, literally overnight, has captured a third of the land of Syria at no price, no concession. He had to make no concessions, pay no price, do nothing other than just send people up to take it. So this doesn't sound to me like we even pose restraints on Assad. It means like he's just literally been gifted control over a third of the national territory at no concession, no price. He had to do nothing. How about safeguarded the Kurdish interests? Well, I think that's self-explanatory. The Kurds have now been forced to align themselves with Assad, who in the short term may be fine, but once this is all over, I doubt very seriously whether the Kurds are going to be treated well. Not to mention, by the way, the Yazidi and the Christian communities that the Kurds were protecting, who now are also under Assad's rule. Suffice it to say that nothing here has safeguarded their interests. Now, there's news today that the Vice President and the Secretary of State were able to go to Turkey and work out what's being called the ceasefire. And let me just say, I think they deserve praise along with the President for pursuing that mission, because any time that human lives are spared from death in a war, that is cause for celebration. It does not appear to me, however, with all due respect, that this is really a ceasefire. It is more an ultimatum. Because what it basically is saying is, Erdogan is saying, here's land that I intend to take. I intend to drive every Kurd out of this area, and I intend for Turkey to control this area in northern Syria as a security zone, as he calls it. And the only thing he's done, agreed to, is an ultimatum. The Kurds can leave this area voluntarily in the next 5 days, or I'll move in and take it and kill them. So you could call it a ceasefire, but frankly, it doesn't appear to have changed the strategic objective that Erdogan has for that part. And I certainly think that while it's good news that they've made some lemonade out of this lemon, nonetheless, these are cities in which not just Kurdish troops, but people, families are going to have to leave now, and we're going to have to be involved in helping to coordinate and guarantee that, which runs its own risks. But ultimately, it's an ultimatum. You have 5 days to leave before I move in and kill you. How about the limiting Iran's influence? First of all, clearly, Iran will now have more operating space in Syria. The lack of a U.S. presence there means that Iran and its affiliated groups, particularly these Hezbollah offshoots that now are in Syria, will have much more operating space, and the stronger Assad is, the stronger Iran will be. Assad is a very close ally of the Iranians, and the more space he controls, the more space they have to operate. So part embedded in this, by the way, is if you've noticed, Iran has developed the ability to conduct attacks against the United States, sometimes using third groups that they control to either blame the attacks on, to claim credit for the attacks, or in some cases to conduct them. Because what this does is it gives Iran the capability of attacking the United States without facing international condemnation for the attack. Enough deniability, especially from countries that are looking to not blame Iran anyway, because it would force them to get out of the Iran deal. And they've gotten away with it. But one of the things that Iran has calculated in these attacks, one of the things they've taken into calculation is, we believe the United States is trying to get out of the region. Meaning, if we attack them, we can hit them much harder than we ever have before, because they don't want another war. They're not going to hit us back as hard. We can get away with more. And I would submit to you, I'm pretty confident that this decision has strengthened that perception, not weakened it. And I fear what that could mean next. By the way, this also increases Iran's influence in Iraq. If you're an Iraqi politician right now, whether you're a Shia or a Sunni, and you've just seen this decision, you're thinking to yourself, we are next. And when the Americans leave here at some point, and at some point we'll have to, the Iranians are going to become the most important group on the ground. In fact, there were reports yesterday that there was these protests in the street, and there were Iranian-linked militias with snipers on the rooftops operating in Iraq. These were not elements of the army or the police force. These were Iranian elements operating in Iraq. This has increased their influence in Iraq and their ability to determine the future of Iraq in a way that's terrible for us, terrible for our allies like Israel, and of great benefit to the Iranians. Not to mention that Syria creates an extraordinary land bridge that the Iranians can now use to increasingly continue to supply Hezbollah in Lebanon, to increasingly supply their own militias just across the Golan Heights. The irony in all this, ironically, is that this decision actually, I fear, makes it likelier that there's going to be a war. And I'll tell you why. As I pointed out first, the Iranian attack calculation. This further strengthens their belief that they can get away with even more brazen attacks because the threshold for a U.S. military response is higher than it's ever been because we're looking to get out, and this proves it. And what that could mean is they can miscalculate. And we're going to have to respond, and all of a sudden you're in a real shooting war, not a 2,000 person on the ground working with the Kurds war, a real regional conflict. The other is all of our alliances around the world are built on security guarantees. In Eastern Europe, the NATO security guarantee in many of these countries is a 300, 400, 500-man force, a tripwire, that the Russian, not enough to stop a Russian incursion, but there, because if they were confronted by Russians, would trigger a broader conflict. You could say the same about South Korea, our presence in Japan, the commitments we've made to Israel, the troop presence we have now in Saudi Arabia. It goes on and on and on and on. And ask yourself, after this, will any ally relying on the United States security assurances be more or less confident of our assurances? I'll tell you this, less than 48 hours before this withdrawal decision was made, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff gave unequivocal assurances that we were not going anywhere. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a general, General Milley, said, we're there, we're not going anywhere, these are all rumors. 48 hours later, this withdrawal announcement was made. With all due respect, because it's not his fault, I don't blame him, he believed that. What is his credibility now when he says anything like that to anybody else? Or when he warns someone not to do something against us because we'll act in return? Maybe his credibility isn't shot, and I would warn our enemies not to view it that way, but I can tell you it certainly hasn't been strengthened by this. And one last point on this, Russia and China are going all over the world trying to come up with these ad hoc anti-U.S. coalitions. Coalition of countries we're sanctioning to try to get around the dollarization of the global economy. Coalitions to fight us against impediments against Chinese spyware and technology. Coalitions to limit our presence in one part of the world or another. And the argument they make to these countries is, why are you aligned with America? They are unreliable. They are unreliable partners. They will cut on you as soon as it makes sense domestically for them to do so, or somebody else gets elected and has a different opinion. Well, ask yourself, has that argument been strengthened or weakened? Have we made it easier or harder for Russia and China to make that argument, including the countries who we have basing agreements with now, including with countries that we're meeting with every single day and asking them, don't buy Russian weapons, don't install Chinese technology and spy in your safe city initiative so they can spy on you and ultimately on us. Don't allow them to take over your port facility or operate military or rotationally based military forces in your national territory. And we'll help you with those things instead. Well, I can tell you, when China and Russia go to them the next time and say America's unreliable, they'll have one more exhibit to show them as evidence to prove it. And that's why I say that this decision has an impact that goes well beyond Syria. And I will tell you that I think what the Vice President and the Secretary of State did today is noble. Their lives are going to be saved because now they have 5 days to leave those areas. But that doesn't address any of these other repercussions. In the blink of an eye, we completely undermined and unraveled the very justification for this operation. All the stated reasons that we said we were there. We had these 2,000 troops working with the Kurds to keep ISIS from reemerging and to provide leverage in a future Syrian settlement, to restrain Assad's power, to safeguard Kurdish interests, our partners' interests, and to limit Iranian influence. Every single one of those stated interests that was our policy less than 2 weeks ago has been wiped out. And one of the favorite questions in the hallway from the reporters is, what should Congress do now? What can we do? Well, I think we're all searching to see what we can do to mitigate some of this damage. But I want to be honest with you, there are some mistakes and some decisions that cannot be reversed. There is some damage that cannot be mitigated. And I fear that some of these things are a part of it. We'll spend time thinking about it. I think there might be some opportunities for the administration in the weeks and months to come to do some things about it. But right now, I think we need to prepare ourselves for the consequences of what this is going to mean in the long term. And so it was kind of a long answer to give someone at a gas station when I had a flight to catch in 45 minutes, and they were in a hurry as well. But I hope to people back home and potentially around the country who have an interest in this topic, I was at least able to shine some light on why some of us do not support this decision. It isn't because we favor endless wars or want invasions. It's because while this may be popular when first presented to people, when you view it in its totality and entirety, sometimes what is popular in the short term is not good for America's national security in the long term. And it's my fear that this is one such example. Mr. President, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.